primary victim of war, men or women, starting with you?
Oh my God. I'm going to need a minute to think about that. Let's not start with me. Plead the fifth.
How about,
No.
I'll count to 10.
No. You're going to have to start with somebody else.
Okay. Start with you. Go ahead.
I'm going to go men on that one.
I'll say men.
Men.
I think both, but...
Both?
Yeah, I think both.
Both?
Both,
Okay.
for sure.
Both.
Yeah, Loki.
Men.
Probably men.
Okay. Now, for those of you who said both, assuming you had to pick one or the other, which do you pick? So
Man.
I mean, I can't really pick because I feel like, I don't know if y'all want me to elaborate, but
Sure, you can elaborate.
I feel like the women are suffering just as much. If the men are at war and they're dying and the women got to pick up the pieces of all that, and then raise children by themselves and all that, then, they're both really victims.
I would say
if you
both
ask
are
me.
victims,
I
but
agree.
he asked who's the primary victim.
Primary, I think both.
Who would you rather be in this
just because you're
situation?
dead, there's children now growing up with fathers and all that.
Wait.
And
But you get to
so-
watch them grow up.
Okay, let me get your answer.
So, and then we're talking about like literal war, right? Not some like metaphorical.
Yeah, so you said both. If you had to pick, which?
Statistically, I don't know. I don't know. If you look it up, it'd probably be men.
Okay, so going back to your
Statistic?
point, you're saying, well, it's both because, well, the men are dead, but the women, it's tragic. They've lost their husband, their father.
Yeah, you don't know what
son,
they have to do
whatever it
to
is.
keep it going.
But
keep
wouldn't
it
you
pushing.
agree that when it comes to being a victim of something, being really, really sad isn't as bad as being dead?
What's the emotional trauma being passed down now onto these generations through these men being dead? Sure, they're the primary victims. Are they the primary victims? I don't know. Because now you go to war. Now, let's say your grandpa goes to war, your dad goes to war, your uncles go to war. Now, your grandma and your mom is raising, let's say, 5, 6, 7 children, and you can't even raise these kids I don't know, and these kids don't have any fathers in their life. So are they really the men, sure, they died. They went to war and fought and died, but they're still a victim.
Or
at
then you
home,
have the
so-
Let me ask you a different
I don't
question.
know.
If somebody has cancer and then they die of cancer, are they the primary victim?
Well, of course.
Or
But that's
is
cancer.
their
That's a
family-
disease. I think it's different.
Yeah,
than war.
but you still have to pick up the pieces, and you have emotional trauma.
That's true.
And
That is
all
very
the same,
true.
all the same side effects, right?
Well, when you say primary victim, are you talking about physically? Okay, obviously the men who go to war.
In totality. I'm not making any differentiation between
I feel like you kinda
mentally,
have to, though, in this
physically. No,
situation.
not really.
Why not
Well, the
really?
question is in totality.
I feel like it
So,
goes both ways.
I would say-
I think he made a good point with the cancer thing. I do think he did make a good point with that.
Speaking of which, we didn't
But
get your
yes.
answer to the question.
Both.
Both. Okay.
I would ask, who would you rather be, a man in war or a woman at home stuck with, picking up the pieces?
You're asking a woman from her point of view what I would rather be. I don't know. That's a fair question.
Just what situation would you rather find yourself in?
I wouldn't even want to be a man, so.
Men in that
I don't know,
situation
Okay,
also have
then we'll just ask it this way: would you rather go fight the wars while the men stayed at home?
If I was physically more.
No, just as you are
adapted,
right
sure.
now.
Huh?
As you are right now.
As I am right now. But I want to fight a war. Definitely not.
Yeah, definitely not.
I don't think anybody wants to fight war.
Do you think, so
including
let's
men.
assume for a second that you're happily married, okay, and your husband has a busted leg, okay, and you get drafted and you get sent off to war and he stays home. And while you're in the war and there's blood and guts everywhere and you're watching your friends get, sniped and
It's the
all this
righteous
other
thing to
stuff,
do
and,
for
and you
America.
hang on, and you die, is your husband as much of a victim as you?
If
I'll tell you in a
wait,
second.
I'm sorry. So if my husband's a stay-at-home,
Yeah.
because I don't know what happened. I got drafted. Okay.
Yeah.
Is he much of a victim? Yeah, I think so. I think
You
now
think
he's got
as
to
much
pick up
of
the
a victim as
pieces
you
of.
are?
Yeah, he's of just as much of a victim of war as I am. I think.
That's great. In his next marriage, he can sit down and be like, "Oh man, I've had it rough. My wife died in a war, and I'm as much of a victim as she is.
Yeah,
and,
poor him, man.
And so, you know,
don't know what that did to him.
Really? That's what you think? That's the point of view?
Yeah, well, think about a woman. I mean, if a woman has sit there and her man died, and now she's got to go on with that. I mean, who is to even say like she goes and remarries? But let's say she does.
I'm not saying she's not going to have like emotional trauma from it. I'm just asking, do you really think that she's the primary victim here?
I think she's a primary victim. Yeah, I think so. I mean, but that's just my opinion.
Well, then how come your husband wouldn't be the primary victim if you went off to war?
I just said he would have been. I mean,
he would have been. So your husband.
I mean, I said both. Like my answer to the question wasn't man or woman. It was, I feel like both are. So that's my answer. It's not.
I don't think
that
you can choose a primary. Is what she's saying.
Exactly. I don't think like that. I think they're very much equally primary victims of war. That's what I think.
They're equally primary victims.
Yes, there's a war going on, just like cancer. If my husband dies of cancer, I feel like I'm primarily a victim of cancer. It took my husband. Now I have to sit here and pick up the pieces of that. So now that makes me somewhat a victim as well. Like I had to deal with that.
So
maybe just because I don't have cancer doesn't mean I'm not a victim.
So if you could choose, if your husband had cancer or you had cancer, you could choose, which one would you choose?
What if we had to choose which one had to have cancer? I mean, I think being a righteous person, you'd always choose yourself. So I guess I would choose myself. I wouldn't want.
You choose yourself.
I wouldn't want. I mean.
But wouldn't you be victimizing him a bit?
I mean, yeah. But he would be a victim if he chose. It'd be the same way, vice versa. If I wanted to do it, and he wanted, you know. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple clarifying questions on this one. So when it comes to, some of you said both. Does anybody here think it's women? Or is it both?
I think it's both.
Say more.
Okay, so I'd like to perhaps break this down into a couple different conflicts. So, and I want to break it down geographically. So, the United States, for World War I, who's the primary victim of war of the U.S. population during World War I, men or women, or is it both?
Wait a second.
Okay,
But you're saying the primary victim of war.
In
during World War I.
Yeah.
Does that change your answer at all? For those of you who said both.
Well, who was the primary victim? Who had the most casualties was obviously men, and probably young men at that. But you know, does that mean the women weren't victims in World War I? Yes, they definitely were. They had to pick up the pieces.
The women had to pick up. Okay, your answer. You said both, right? Okay, for World War I, what's your answer for U.S. men?
For U.S. men, I think, well, since I said both, I feel like men, it's more physical trauma, and for the women, it would be more mental. And I'm not saying that war doesn't have...
For the women, yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's just because, like, say your, like, husband died, and that's, like, the love of your life, and, like, you love that man, and he dies, then it's like, oh, like, that's...
Okay.
It's like
and I believe
emotional
too, in World
physical.
War I, or no, I guess it was probably more like World War II, where it was like the economy went really bad, and women were the ones who had to carry the economy while men were at war, you know?
So just to be clear on the World War II note that you just brought up,
I know they had to get up and like go work.
Yeah, but it's sad because women didn't have rights before
crazy.
that.
Those victims.
That's why they gave us rights, because they couldn't work.
Weren't they like woman?
Well, just to be clear, you said women didn't. There's a lot.
I mean, they did have some rights, but they didn't have the right to vote, and so
wait. Just to be clear, women. You're saying your argument is women didn't have the right to vote during World War II.
I mean, I can't remember the year, but if it was the 30s, 40s, or 50s that women were able to vote.
What year did women get the right to vote?
I don't know. Was it the 50s or was it the 30s?
Well, here, let me ask you a different question.
I'm not sure.
Year? What decade was World War I?
It was in the 1910s, right?
Well done.
Yeah.
What years were World War II?
It was the late 1920s, 1930s, I believe, wasn't it? Or didn't it start? It all started like Nazi Germany. All that started around like the 20s, the early 20s. So I can't give you exact dates.
You're not.
I can't remember.
I mean, you said late 30s, so you're
no,
not
I said late
totally far
20s,
off,
early 30s, right? Wasn't it?
Well, not late 30s is correct. Late 20s for World War II, not so much.
Okay.
Women got the right. Okay, World War I, 1914 to 1918.
Mm-hmm.
Women got the right to vote 1920. World War II, 1939, 1945.
Right. Okay. So there you go. You know more than me.
You said that women.
I know women weren't really working during World War II up until that time. So I know that that's when women became in the workforce more.
And
was
you
during
think
World War II.
women having to be involved in the war effort during World War II is a bigger level of suffering and victimization than the men who had to go?
I mean, what are the women having to deal with? Like they have to raise. Listen. They have to raise families. They have to work. They have no help. The economy is super poor. So these women are victims.
Extreme conditions. I'll explain the conditions to women. They had to go into factories, sometimes for up to 8 hours a day, and work.
Listen, no. And their husbands are their husbands are at war. They're at home taking care of all the children, all the bills. The economy is super poor. The economy is super horrible. We're in the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression's in the 30s. So wasn't it in the 30s, early 30s?
Depression.
Yeah. Well, maybe that was after.
So back to history.
So hang on.
Man, I know some history,
what would be the distinction
I can't remember
now?
Exact years.
Wait, what would be the distinction now between a single mom getting up and going to work? It's just like I don't get it. If the victim, they're victims because they had to look after their own children, which they would have to do anyway, and they had to work.
No, they're victims of war.
And guess what? Nobody's
because
forced
of the
them
economy,
to work.
because their men are not there. They're at war. Their husbands are dying. Their fathers are dying. Their uncles, brothers, sons are dying. That's emotionally traumatizing. I know during the World War II economy was not that great. I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the economy was great, but I thought it wasn't from what I thought. But
I've got a couple questions here. So,
I mean, those poor women, they had to go work.
It's not about working.
Okay,
There's an emotional trauma, and women are way more.
I know it's way more
men.
emotionally traumatizing to deal with the death rather than getting blown up yourself.
I'm not saying like the men aren't victims.
So let me just throw out a couple statistics here. So 16 million Americans served in the United States Armed Forces during World War II. There were almost 300,000 were killed, 670,000 were wounded, almost exclusively men.
Yeah.
There were also 130,000 American prisoners of war, of whom 116,000 returned home after the war. Now let's also make an assumption here, and maybe Andrew, I don't know if you can help me search this. What percentage of the serving military men were married? Because typically they are drafting 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. I know people got married much younger then. I don't know if they have statistics on that.
Uncles, fathers, brothers,
let's just for the sake of
husbands.
Let's just for the sake of argument say that a majority of the men were not married, didn't have children, didn't have a significant other, didn't have a girlfriend. So the sort of in my view, the secondary victims would be who? The family?
It's estimated.
Wait, hold on.
About 46% were married.
46%. Okay, so a minority, but still a lot, right?
Still a lot.
Okay, but let's talk about then that majority of men who were single, who were not married. If we talk about them, we look at them. I assume they only had a mother and a father. If they're the ones that go and die, and they don't have a significant other to mourn for them, wouldn't hold on, let me finish my point.
Grandma.
Let me finish my point. Wouldn't you said mom, grandma, sister,
younger children
brother,
might have,
father,
single.
uncle. You do realize that the suffering, the secondary suffering that you're alluding to, that is experienced by family members, is equally shared by the genders. The mother loses a son, the father loses a son. So assuming these majority of men,
I think it's wrong to think that women aren't just as much as victims, but okay.
Hold on.
Men are more victims.
But hold on. So, but actually engage with the scenario I'm giving you here. Of the single men who had, let's assume they had a mom and a father who were living, and let's say they had no siblings, and it was just the mom and the father, and then that boy, man, whatever, went to war and he died. His mom is going to grieve. His father's going to grieve and mourn. in that scenario, who's the primary victim of war?
I mean, definitely the guy, I guess. But I mean, who's to say that the emotional impact and physical and financial impact doesn't reflect just as much in the family?
Right, but okay, so hold on. I'm trying to look at this from a math perspective here.
I just got to ask this real fast. Who's the primary victim in an abortion, the mother or the fetus?
Oh, man.
Fetus.
I'm not going to speak on this one. This is
Yeah, I'm just asking you. Who's the primary victim, the mother or the fetus?
I don't know. An abortion?
Yeah.
Probably the baby. I mean, I don't know.
Depends. I feel like.
I feel like I'm definitely pro woman's choice, so I'm not gonna sit here.
All right,
and,
let me. We can come to that later. We can come to that later. So, okay. If there's one mother, if there's one father, and there's one male who dies, and if this is the majority of the men that were involved in World War II that lived in the United States.
But but just because they were single doesn't mean that they didn't have children or anything. Just, you don't.
They probably,
you know what I'm
if
saying?
they weren't married, they probably didn't have children in this time period.
I would say yes and no. You know, I
Okay,
agree with you. I agree with you because during that time,
Okay,
obviously,
let's
but does that mean they didn't have children?
Wait, hold
No.
on. But the
So
children.
out of
Let's
the
assume the
40%,
gender of the children of
46%.
these men who had children out of wedlock. 50% were boys and 50% were girls.
Okay, what the children, the babies?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that have to do with
You're
who's the
the one
victim? These
you
children are
brought
now
up.
growing up with no father.
I don't even understand
out of
your
wedlock,
argument.
even worse.
I don't even understand your
Yeah.
argument here because the child could be a boy or a girl. The framework of the question is who's the primary victim of war, men or women?
And
so
I
if it's
said
a
both.
boy child and if it's a female child and this is equally distributed, then
How is
this
it
doesn't
not?
help your argument that it's both.
It does.
No, because
It
okay,
does,
if you-
actually.
fine, I'll grant you. Let's say he had 2 children out of wedlock. He has one father, one mother, one boy, and one girl. That's still an extra man who's dead. Who is the primary victim of war?
Everybody involved.
It's amazing. I have to. So I don't even know how to actually argue this. I'm just going to
Exactly.
if Andrew, I'm going to defer to you because I can't even.
I was just going to say, if the baby is the primary victim in an abortion, what is the deciding factor that makes the baby the primary victim and not the mother?
Mother's health.
How
Oh,
far
yeah.
along the fetus is?
Yeah, no, hang on. I'm asking the gal here. She was the one who gave the answer that she thought that the baby was the primary victim. If that's the case, what is that deciding factor as to why the baby's the victim, the primary victim, and not the mother?
I mean,
What do you think that would be?
I feel like I can't really answer this question because it's not really something I want to speak on, for one, and two, I'm pro people just make their choices. Like I do what I would do personally. I don't put onto what the next person could do. So what I feel like would be wrong, I'm not gonna judge somebody else. So. You know what I'm saying? Like
not
that's not
asking
my
if you get
yeah,
one or
and
not.
so
He's
I'm not gonna
asking-
answer the question for that reason. What I feel like my opinion is on the answer, I don't want to give it because it's a very political question. And
Okay. Well, let's try it a
yeah.
different way. You would agree that aborting at 9 months would be bad, right? You would at least agree that that's true.
I mean, the baby's full grown, full term.
Yeah.
So,
So if the
sure.
mother had the abortion, then who would be the primary victim?
I mean, why did the mother do it? Like,
Because she
why?
didn't want it
She just
anymore.
didn't want it. Okay, then the baby. Because now you're
Then
just
the
being
baby.
selfish.
So what would make the baby the primary victim?
I mean, you carried a baby full term to where it
Yeah.
should be.
Would it be the
A baby
death
couldn't
part
live
that would
outside
make
the
the
womb at
baby
this
the primary
point, so it
victim?
doesn't even need to be in your, so at that point, if you get an abortion, then sure. But I don't really want to speak on abortion because, it's not my place, I don't think.
All
I
right.
think-
Well, do you have something quick?
Yeah, pretty quick. I think the point he was trying to get at is the baby's the primary victim because the baby's dying, and so he was going to turn that over to men in war dying and saying that if you use that logic for abortion, it can be applied to this scenario
It's
where
like
the man would
comparing
be the
apples
bigger
and
victim.
oranges, like war to abortion, like It's two different things. War is a very like.
You can compare things that are very different.
Yeah, there's never a comparison which is going to be exact. What we're trying to just do is just test the logic for perceived victimhood.
Right.
So in this case, in war, I think I understand what you're
Save
saying.
that
You're
one,
saying that there's a bunch of external factors which could make women also victims in war, which would include things like emotional damage, trauma, psychological intergenerational trauma, which could happen because you lost grandpa when you were a kid, all of these different factors which could possibly go into this. Okay, but if we're looking, even though we have all these correlates for different factors of victimhood, I would still say there's primary correlates. In this case, I would say the primary correlate is death. And so I would ask that even in an abortion, I would assume that this type of trauma and stuff like this at 9 months would also exist for women. So why would the baby be the primary victim? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't really want to speak on the abortion. So.
Okay.
She doesn't want
I
to
just
engage
don't
on
want
that.
to.
That's fine. I will just really quick, last thing here. Nick, you know that Ukraine split screen that we have? I'll have you pull that up. Nope, not yet. Okay, it's okay. I should have been more clear. Okay. You guys are all familiar with the Ukraine conflict, correct? Mm-hmm. Oh, actually, wait. Before I do that, ask her if a woman goes to war, who's the primary victim of war? If we switched it,
I already answered this question.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, with you. You said the same thing. You said if your husband got his leg blown off and you had to go and you got whatever the war, and you had to fight, would he be the victim too? I mean, I already stated that I think both are the victims. So,
Okay.
yes.
So there's a very recent conflict, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So this one's an interesting one because it's much more recent. We're all familiar with it, I'm assuming. So Ukraine is kind of the perfect microcosm of the inconsistency inherent in feminism. Women are the equals of men until the bombs start to drop. Now, I'll ask you once more for everybody who said it's both. In the Ukraine conflict, who's the primary victim of war, men or women, starting with you?
I am not familiar enough on this situation or educated enough on this situation to speak on it. Like, just plain and simple.
Well, but you were able to, for the previous question, you were
I don't
able
know
to
what's
say
going.
both.
I don't know what's going on.
Well, you are familiar that there is a war in Ukraine, correct?
Okay. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you asking specific to that? Are you asking specific to that war?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay. What about
in that war? If I'm going to be honest.
You said both. Does your answer change at all when it comes to Ukraine?
Who's the primary victim in war with the Ukraine?
Of the Ukraine war, men or women?
Aren't women fighting in that war?
Aren't the citizens? There are some women.
I guess whoever that is.
Let's assume that 5% of the military is female. Go ahead and answer the question.
But aren't the citizens fighting the war as well, not just the military?
What?
Aren't the citizens of Ukraine fighting the war, not just the military?
Well,
so then it would be both, because they're both fighting.
Somebody.
I mean, I think both, regardless of if the woman is fighting or not. So.
No, civilians aren't really fighting in the war. No, there's some incidences of that, but it's primarily the two military forces, and civilians are doing what they usually do in war and supporting the military operations via support roles.
Then I guess the primary victim would be whoever's the bigger statistic. Which I don't know.
I mean, that's what he was proving. That's what he's trying to make his whole point this whole time.
Oh, I mean, it's overwhelmingly men who are dying in the war, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But that's every war. It's overwhelmingly men who are dying in every war. Doesn't matter if it's that conflict
starting all
or a
these
different
wars?
conflict.
Probably men.
Not the men that are fighting in it.
Yeah, definitely not. You know, war is
Those are the men we're talking
rich man's
about.
game.
Well, I mean, war affects everybody. It's gonna hurt families. It's gonna hurt children and everyone. So I feel like there's not really, you can't even compare two different types of pain, because if someone's staying at home, they're still going to be hurt and affected by the people that are fighting in the war. Like if my son gets drafted, I'm going to feel the pain of that just as much as he might be feeling the physical pain. So I feel like again, it's both because you can't really compare physical and mental pain.
But that
You don't
really
know
wasn't the
necessarily.
question.
What's the
The
question?
question was, who is the primary?
Primary.
Like,
But
all
we're
this
saying
other
both.
it's like mental
You
gymnastics
guys are not
to come to these
understanding
longer
that.
answers.
We're saying both. It's
You guys
not
just
mental
aren't liking the
gymnastics.
answer.
Exactly.
Well,
You guys are
Exactly.
simply just not
General.
liking the answer. You guys
No,
want
because
more
we're
saying
giving
it's
why
both.
we feel like it's both, and we're saying it's not just a physical aspect, it's also an emotional aspect that, and not just that, but it's a lot of other things that, you know, women have to pick the pieces up on in war, and so that makes them less of a victim because they didn't die in it. Like, I agree with that.
Okay,
That's just that's my opinion.
So I'll just kind of, where I'm going here with the
Like,
Ukraine
they're all
conflict. I don't know, did you weigh in on this? Did you give a,
I mean, yeah, I guess both.
still both? Okay.
I'm going to say both.
So I'll just give you guys an additional information and see if it changes your mind at all. So at the breakout of the war, there was a decree by the Ukrainian government that required all military-age men, in fact, even very old men, so all men between the ages of 18, I believe, to either 60 or 65, had to remain in the country. They could not flee, they had to stay, whereas women and children could leave. And in fact, a great many women, millions of women, fled Ukraine. They were not compelled to join the military or anything like that in the same way that men were. Knowing this additional information, this inequality, that the men had to stay, I think if they got caught, they could face punishment, they could go to jail, fines, etc. Knowing just this additional piece of information, does that change your answer at all?
Sure, a little bit.
Into the mic, please.
I said sure a little bit. I think, yeah, I guess like that would make them more of a victim, but that makes them a victim of their own country and, you know, politics and
Physical.
A victim
who
of their
are,
own country, but
yeah,
their
because
country's
your
at
country,
war.
you're, of course, which it's
And if the
good
wartime
to
policy, if the wartime policy is to allow every single woman in the
but you
country,
can't leave. You're being. I mean, then that's America does it too. So there's a draft, and you have to go if they say you got to go. I mean, that sucks. Like that is
okay,
like that.
does it change your answer at all, knowing this extra piece of information?
I mean, I kind of have the same feeling. Like men are more of the victim of physical pain because, like, even if it's vice versa, like if the men were staying home.
Do you think war is strictly physical injury?
Emotional too.
Oh no.
Have you heard about this?
No, it's strain.
Have you heard
It's
about
PTSD.
shell shock?
Yeah.
It's PTSD. I understand
Have you heard
that.
of shell shock?
Yes, I understand that.
Okay. So why do you keep going to this? Well, in the physical realm, men suffer more.
Because if you go onto a war field versus stay at home, like how are you? Like, are you more likely to get like bombed? Yeah. Like physical pain. Like if you walk out into a minefield versus staying at home. Like who's gonna,
I guess where I'm confused here is you're saying, well, men on the physical realm they have it worse, but in the psychological, mental
oh no,
realm,
that's terrible. No one can like.
But so I don't really understand, because you say both. So if you say both, wouldn't you follow your argument up from, well, men on this hand have it worse, but women on this hand have it worse. But I failed to see on which hand
It's just-
women have it worse
Well,
when it comes to war.
I wouldn't say worse. It's just bad. War is bad. There's no good war. There's
Let
no
me
one
ask you a
in the
question.
right.
If somebody stole $5 from you versus somebody stole your entire life savings, I don't know how much your life, maybe if it's $5, it doesn't matter, but which one would be worse?
Definitely life savings.
Okay. Because of the magnitude in which someone has deprived you of your belongings, in this case, your money.
Yeah. Are you comparing that to the men in war? Is that the statistic?
Well, if a woman trips and falls and get a boo-boo, you know,
Well, I mean, like.
versus a man gets a shell impaled through his body.
Yeah, that blows.
One's
that
worse than
blows.
the other.
But like his kids at home, like it's just as bad. Like his kid. I mean, it's not. No, it's not just as bad. I take it back. But the kids at home are still gonna like feel shit. The mom's gonna feel shit. So
Yes, I don't disagree with
So
you.
I guess arguably men would have it statistically worse. But okay, now I'm gonna change my answer because men statistically would have it worse. But
Okay.
I guess my point is that the people at home are still gonna feel that too.
And then what about you?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, it sounds like you're coming from a physical standpoint. So physically.
No, I'm speaking in totality.
Okay, yeah. I mean, arguably because they experience both mental pain and physical pain, I would say statistically, yeah. But I'm not taking away from those who are suffering back at home as well.
Yeah,
No,
just
everyone's a
neither am
victim
I.
of
Sucks
war.
for everyone.
Yeah.
Nobody
But
ever
that's
denied
not the argument.
that the women aren't victims of war.
Women
of course they
absolutely
are.
suffer.
Primary
But I
victim.
think
Women
it's both.
absolutely suffer, but thank you, Abigail. The original question was, who is the primary? That means there can be a secondary.
I still think it's situational.
I think it could be situational if the man got killed and then the son, like let's say a woman had a son and then he like went in a spiral and died too. I think that the mother would be the primary.
Men still, if she has a son, wouldn't men still be the primary victim? Because that's a male.
That's
a double.
Daughter,
yeah.
What if it's a daughter?
What if it's a daughter?
I mean, she does the same thing. She spirals out. My dad died in war. I hate life now. That's my dad. I love my dad.
But wouldn't she then be a secondary? Wouldn't she be a secondary victim? Because her father was the primary
victim.
Also, I would like to say, so yes, you have a whole family that's losing their father. As he goes off to war, but you have the father that's losing his whole family as he goes off to war. They're at home. He's at war. They have each other. Yeah. He has himself.
That's exactly why we're saying both.
Anyways, there's one. Nick, can you pull up that photo of Ukraine? Then we'll move it on.
When you said the whole statement about $5 versus life savings, were you comparing life savings to death? Is that what it was?
I wasn't.
Were you trying to? Because you were saying
more of an analogy, I guess. But
analogy.
I wasn't comparing. Obviously, death is worse than losing your life savings.
Okay, obviously. But what I'm asking is, when you did that analogy, is it worse to lose $5 or is it worse to lose your life savings?
10,000, yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. Life savings is what you were saying. Were you saying were you trying to kind of compare losing? Obviously not compare, but was your analogy with life savings,
Well,
were you trying to say?
I don't understand your question. I'm sorry.
When you brought up that analogy, what was your point? What were you trying to prove?
I was trying to, I guess, differentiate by degrees of harm, degrees of hurt. So, for example, if somebody stole $5 from me, I'd be upset for like 30 seconds.
Okay.
If I went and saw my bank, looked at my bank statements and saw that all my money had been drained, the degree of like anxiety response I would have, the degree of, and assuming it's like unretrievable, like it's gone, I've lost my money, I am like distraught. There's legitimate concerns over, can I afford rent? Can I do like that?
Of course.
So there's bigger ramifications.
So life savings drained, what was the comparison to the, men in war?
I just explained it to you.
No, I'm asking what was the comparison?
I don't understand
the men in the
question.
war were the life savings because the men in the war getting more deprived.
He's giving a scalability, right? So like an order of operations to scalability. If I steal a penny from you, it's going to affect you less than if I steal $5 from you. It's going to affect you less than if I steal 100. It's going to affect you less than if I steal 1,000, et cetera, right? So on a scale of how much you've been victimized, you would say if somebody stole $5 from you, it would victimize you less than if they stole your entire life savings. So he's saying the ultimate thing here, though, is your life. At the end of the day, that is
your life. So
meaning
that the man, the hypothetical man in war has passed away. Yeah. Meaning the hypothetical man in war has passed away. Your life. Meaning the hypothetical man in war has passed away. Right. Yeah. So in that situation, I think the other person is a bigger victim because the man has passed away. He's no longer experiencing mental trauma. The man has passed away. He experienced death, which obviously is horrible. But now the people at home, the women,
they have to carry.
They are carrying on.
They have to carry on with that.
So do you think
and they have to go teach their children and their children.
So that's why I'm saying this question is situational because.
So then, by this logic, then you think it's better to be dead than be alive with trauma?
Sometimes.
Honestly, yeah.
And are all of you traumatized?
Are all of us traumatized?
Like in general?
So, haven't you experienced trauma? Isn't psychological
every
trauma
person has,
all of it? And aren't you living with trauma? Then why aren't you unaliving?
Because maybe it's not that deep.
It's situational. Like, I don't know why you can't understand that it's situational.
Yeah, I agree. It's situational. But what I'm saying to you is that it's beyond obvious to me that people would much rather live with trauma than be dead. That seems obvious.
I mean, a lot of
me.
people kill themselves. No, it's not because a lot of people kill themselves every year. So
a lot of people,
especially Americans,
how many
pass
people
away.
choose to live with trauma rather than unaliving?
Actually, a lot of people pass away from self-inflicted injuries because
Very
of the
few.
trauma they've been through.
A lot of people kill themselves, especially
a
lot of people die to suicide.
A lot more people live with trauma than unalive themselves
but
from
a
trauma.
lot still unalive themselves
but
because of that.
Like, what statistic, like, can you pull that out of and say, like, these people live with trauma, like, Like, you're just saying.
So
stuff.
therefore,
like,
can you just
like
say that
I'm
it's
just
situational?
saying, okay, I'm
like,
just saying,
I don't know
so
why.
let's just see if we can agree if it's obvious or not.
So.
You guys
How
are
many
looking at this
women
black
as a
and white.
percentage, as a percentage, do you think live with significant trauma? Over 20%?
Yes.
If it's over, do you think that women are unaliving themselves at a rate of 20%?
I mean, I don't know the percentage,
know.
but I know that
You don't
every
know
year
if
it goes
women
up.
are unaliving
People who want to kill
themselves at a rate
themselves
of
every year it goes
20%?
up,
No, they're not.
which means people are dealing with a lot of trauma and they don't want to live with it.
If you lost 20% of a population in a war, it would be the biggest bloodbath known to man. 20% is astronomical. We're talking about astronomical numbers. There's no way, it should be completely obvious to you that there's no fucking way 20% of women unalive themselves due to trauma. That's just insane.
I didn't
There's no way you
You're
could
the
ever
one who
believe
No
that.
one said that.
You're the one who
Like,
brought
look
up
it up.
20%.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know
I-
what
no,
percentage. I know that.
We didn't know
Do you
what
think
you meant by
it's
the whole
Suicide is very
20%.
high in America, and I know every year.
You're not listening to the logic, right? You talk more than you listen, and yet I've been sitting here listening, not talking. So the thing is what I asked specifically was this question. Do you think that more women unalive themselves due to trauma or live with the trauma? And she's like, well, I don't know. Okay, well, if that's the case, do you think that at least more than 20% of women experience significant trauma? Yes. Are they unaliving themselves? No, they're not.
Well, however,
But you're not. No, you're not. No,
close.
because I don't feel like what you're saying is like real statistics. You're just throwing numbers out and saying, is that 20% of women who experience high 20% of women who experience high trauma, are they unaliving themselves? A lot of them might be. Who, like, can you tell me?
How many
like,
do you
can you
think
tell
are?
me? Because I can't tell you. Huh?
Well, how many do you think are? So
I don't
out of,
know.
let's say you have, let's just do
Somebody
it easy. Let's just do it easy. If you have 30 women who are experiencing severe trauma, do you think 15 of them are going to unalive
I
themselves?
think no, not 15, but 3.
Do you think
probably
10?
3 out of 30. Probably
Maybe
that's
like
10%.
3 out of 30?
3.
Whatever
That's a
you
lot.
look up is going to be like too big of a statistic anyway. Like I don't think it matters if it's like 5% or 20%. It's a lot. It's bad. Like it's too many. One is too many. An attempt is too many. So no matter, it doesn't even matter that it's like 20%. It's too much. Like I don't even know.
Yeah, but
look
the
it
point
up.
of the question is to make the determination as to whether people would rather, if it's obvious that people would rather live with trauma rather than not. It seems that would be self-obvious to everybody in existence, considering that most people, the overwhelming majority, the vast majority of all of humanity, does not unalive themselves, even though many of them experience massive trauma. They're not unaliving themselves.
But lots of them are still
I
suffering horribly.
But do the
Yeah,
percentage on that.
they could be
People who are
suffering, but if they're making the choice not to
suffering
unalive
massively, how
themselves,
many
then it
what's
seems
the
that they
percentage of
consider
them that
that to be
kill
the
themselves?
superior position,
My bad.
right? It seems that they prefer to be alive. That seems
He's
to be the
arguing
superior
your
position.
guys' statement that it's better to live with trauma than die. Or that it's worse to
I
live with
think-
trauma than die.
I think
I'm
it's
arguing that.
situational.
I think every
That's
person
a
has
statement that you
trauma.
guys made.
I don't think every person has serious trauma. Now, what one person might consider serious,
I
is
think just because
very
somebody
opinion
chooses
We're
to stay
subjective.
alive
Very
throughout their
subjective.
trauma doesn't mean
But
that
to people
they
who
are
are
happy about
experiencing
that.
mass trauma, like very high levels of stress and trauma, and are very not well in their head, like mentally disturbed. How many of these people are unaliving themselves? Probably a decent percentage of them.
yes, but
Now, I'm not saying 50%, maybe 3, 4, 5 to 10% might be, and that's still.
Okay, you know what? Let me just ask this in the most
So
basic
sure,
way
yeah.
possible.
Then
I've been thinking about how I
Then your
can
point
ask
is,
this
yeah,
in a
you're
way that
correct.
you guys
Would you
would
rather
just
live with trauma? Yeah, because
intuitively. Hang on, let me just ask this in a way all of you would just intuitively kind of understand. Do you think if you went to most people, men and women, and you asked them this question, if you push button A, you're going to have experience serious trauma, and if you push button B, you're going to die. Which button do you think they would push?
Starting with you, go ahead.
So
I feel like it depends on the person.
Do you want to get shot or do you want to get raped? That's the question.
That's not the question.
Like,
that's not what I said.
Yeah, no, it actually is the question.
Would you rather die or would you rather be raped?
Like, it actually is the question.
It depends on the type of trauma.
It literally is the question.
It's situational.
That's not my question.
But that's
my
trauma.
question was,
Crazy trauma versus dying. What would
button
you
A,
rather choose? Pick
That's not my question. Stop. Here's the question again. Don't rephrase the question.
No, it's like comparing apples to
Okay?
oranges.
The question is, button A, you experience significant trauma. Button B, you die on the spot.
But he
A lightning bolt shoots out of the sky and you die. Those are your two options. Do you think most people would choose button A or button B?
I think people would choose the trauma, but I think would they regret that? They might. I think a high percentage might.
Why do you think they would choose the trauma?
Because when after you have dealt with the trauma, now I'm living with this crazy wild shit when I could have just died. You might at that point decide it was.
Why do you think they
I
would
should have
choose
chose to just die?
the trauma?
Screw
Why do
living
you think
with
they
this
would choose the trauma?
Huh? Because they don't
Why do you
know.
think
I
they
mean,
would choose it?
unless they know what the trauma is. Like if the like I said, if it's like, okay, what's the choice? Like I die or I get raped. Like
situation. Because the trauma could.
Why does it always seem to me they put the dumbest and retarded girls at the end of the table?
So the trauma could be, you've dealt with, I don't know, like a little bit of whatever the fuck, like being made fun of in second grade, right? Like you'd probably prefer to live.
I'm more educated than most y'all.
If the trauma is emotional trauma, I'd press the trauma button. If it's medical trauma, I'm pressing the death button.
You raising your hand over here. You haven't spoken much. Go ahead.
Well, it depends, because I mean, everyone's trauma is valid, but like, I mean, if I were to have these two buttons in front of my face, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what would happen after death. But I would choose trauma.
What medical trauma do you experience if your husband dies at war?
What medical MS?
What medical trauma are you experiencing? What are you talking about? It would all be psychological.
Oh,
right?
all psychological. Okay, yeah, psychological.
Yeah, it would all be psychological. So the thing is that when we're talking about trauma here in this context, we're talking about severe psychological trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Would you rather push? Do you think most people would choose button A or button B? Do you think intuitively most people would push button A or button B? B is death. A is psychological trauma.
A.
They would definitely choose A.
Nope.
But
then that should give you some self-apparent evidence that the death portion for most people is the non-preferable option. That's just basic logical demonstration. If intuitively you think almost everybody would choose the button to not die, then it seems self-obvious that people would rather be traumatized than dead. It seems obvious, right?
So if you were like a little kid, right, like back in like Nazi Germany or Jewish, and you had the option before Hitler came in, you had the option to either.
What is Godwin's law? Okay, let's use any analogy.
No.
Besides,
so you could go
Nazis.
through all this trauma, right? You could go get sent to an extermination camp, be severely
No, we're not going to get into that. Use any analogy but that.
Listen.
Use any analogy
Use
but
a different
that one.
Analogy.
I have an analogy. You get in a car accident.
It's because it's listen.
No,
it's not
because
because
I'm gonna ask,
I don't mind
die?
the analogy. Listen,
Or
I don't mind the analogy. The terms of service
If
for
you knew what
the
it was.
platform we're on. They mind the analogy.
Had you guys been
just
on
use
time
any other
today,
analogy.
we would have been able to have gone through the entire pre-show and have given you the instructions about what to avoid. Go ahead.
Here's an analogy. Let's say you leave here tonight and you get in a terrible car accident and you wake up in the hospital and you've broken legs, you have severe damage, medical to your body, and it's psychological. Are you going to say, I wish I would have died?
I feel like that's not.
You would be grateful
that's
to
not
be alive.
extra. That's traumatic, but it's not like to the extreme of what a somebody could deal with in trauma. So, like going and getting in a car accident is trauma, yes, but that doesn't mean.
Yeah, you lost a loved one in war. That's your trauma.
Both your legs are amputated from this accident. But you're still grateful to be alive.
So here, let's just make it even simpler. Button A is you experience all of the trauma a person would experience losing a loved one in war, or button B, you die instantly. Which button do you think most people would push? Button A or button B?
Depends on the person. It's situational.
All right.
Most people. I'm just asking for most people. Which button do you think most people would push?
I just don't think
Doc
that's
Venabilly donated
something you can
$200.
ask.
Rate of major depression, maker of emotional trauma, in US Fem is 26% per 100K. Rate of self-delete is 5% per 100k for femme. Yeah. Most people rather live with severe adversity than death. End idiocy now.
Yeah, I'm not
Andrew, may I ask you why?
Yeah, go ahead.
Bro, may I ask you why?
Hold on.
Final Wave Feminism donated $200. 10 plus years interviewing thousands of women to reach the same conclusion as the most intelligent, respected theologians, philosophers, etc. Women are children. They require top-down guidance.
Okay. May I ask a question?
Thank you, Final Wave Feminism.
Yeah. I'd like to hear your question.
Why is it so black and white to you? Why can't you understand that there's layers to things and that people are different and it can't just be one or the other? Like every single person is different. One person may be okay with living with.
I agree.
Okay, so then why are you trying to argue that with
us? Because
we're all saying both.
So I'm going to explain. So I can grant this to you and say every single human being is different with different preferences. Everything from whether or not they like pineapple on pizza or pepperoni, right? All the way down to the little micro nuances. However, there seems to be shared intuitions that most people have that you would agree that we have, right? So here's a good example of a shared intuition. Taking people's shit that they don't want you to take, they don't like that. That seems to be a shared intuition all over the world. For instance, is there anybody at this table who prefers that people take their stuff away from them? Anybody? Show of hands. A single person who prefers? No, not a single one. Seems like that's a shared intuition, even though all of you have totally different preferences about all sorts of things. So if there's that shared intuition, why shouldn't I think that there could be other shared intuitions like trauma, people wanting to live with trauma rather than death, which could be self-obvious just based on the fact that you think most people would push button A or button B. That seems like now we're getting into, well, we share some sort of intuition here.